All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce myself because I have folks that are online as well, that I know most of you in the room. My name is Cinnamon. I'm the Research Facilities Coordinator here at Hatfield. And I also am sitting on the Animal Care Plan Committee, which we're going to talk about more about today. This is a new policy that Hatfield is rolling out, and based on the email that I sent you guys, you know that we got a month here to kind of figure out all the details, and then it'll officially go into play on the 1st of June. And so I just want to back up a little bit and give you a little history about how this all came about. Hatfield, of course, has always cared about the health and welfare of the animals that are here. This policy just formalizes that a little bit. And there was a driver behind that. We had some animal welfare complaints that went up to the university from here at Hatfield. Those complaints go to the institution at the university that cares for primarily vertebrate animals, but they are responsible for all animals when they have a welfare complaint. And so that is the IACUC, or what was called IACUC. It now is called the Animal Care Program, I believe, at OSU. And so they got a complaint about animal welfare here. They then came back to Bob Cowan, our director, and said, you need to find a way to address this. He pulled together a committee that included representation from the outreach groups, from our formal education programs, and from research. And so those folks are Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan, who's in the back of the room, representing the outreach. Yi Chung is the individual representing the education programs, and those of you doing research, you got stuck with me to represent that. And so we all met and we got together and we talked a little bit about the best way to move forward and address these concerns. And what we decided to do was actually kind of create this more formalized plan. But it will be overseen here at Hatfield. It is not a IACUC procedure, those kind of things. It is our plan. And it is our way of making sure that we are just documenting the things that we're already doing to take care of our critters. And so I just want to walk through the language of this here really quick, and that might help understand who is responsible for kind of implementing this plan. So it includes every researcher, and researcher in this plan includes just about everybody. So you might think of a researcher only as somebody who's doing work with something particular, but in this particular instance, it includes our instructors, it includes our students, it includes our aquarists, it includes our researchers. So it's just about anybody who deals with critters that are here. It only applies to any OSU employee or personnel, or any federal who's working in a OSU building. So that's where it might apply to some of these agency folks in the room. It covers vertebrates, which we've kind of always covered under that animal care plan that the university requires us to do under IACUC. But now we're also including invertebrates, as long as they are post-larval, non-planktonic animals. And so we are not talking rotifers here. And we're not talking our juveniles, because that's just too hard for us to manage those kind of things. And it's any animal that is held in captivity on purpose. So the barnacles growing on the intakes, not counted on this. That's not what we're talking about here. That is held for any of those three purposes that we were talking about: education, outreach, or research. Anybody have questions about how this whole crazy thing kind of came about, or about the definitions that we're talking about on these things? Yeah.
Held in captivity means on site.
On site. Yep. At this point, we're just doing on site. Absolutely. The other thing that having this plan in place helps us a little bit is that international publications are asking folks what their, and Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan talked about this a little bit more if we need to, what your animal care plans are in order to be published. So we're kind of getting ahead of that with this. There's also a push at a university level to start exploring invertebrates in the IACUC process. And so this plan, I'm hoping you will find is much less burdensome, has much less administrative responsibilities than if this kind of got captured under the IACOOK umbrella. Dr. Tim, do you want to talk about anything you want to add to that at all?
Not really, just that I see inverts coming down the pike as there being pressure to include them, as Cinema just said. And one of the things that can often push that off is if the institution has a program in place already like this, that can oftentimes push that off. I'm not saying push it off forever, but that's something that pushes it off.
And it puts the control of what we're doing and how we're doing it here. And that was really my goal, was to make sure that it was our voice and our methods that kind of informed this, and that we didn't pass it off to somebody else. Okay, so we're going to walk through this just a little bit. So basically this means 5 things. Many of them you are already probably doing. One is to know what you can put into our open seawater system. And that is now written in a document that you can review. This only applies to seawater systems in the OSU buildings. If you are an NAL or RSF, there's different limitations because you have a chlorination for your effluent. The OSU buildings have none. Water is pumped out of the reservoir into the systems and back out to the bay. So we need to be a little bit more particular, and we typically are, as a university, as a campus, about what goes into those particular systems. This just kind of formalizes it and makes that a standard practice. And our students who come in and maybe aren't quite as aware of some of the limitations and responsibilities, they'll have a document that allows them to go through this. So we're going to talk about what that looks like here in just a second. We are asking anybody who is holding invertebrates in their labs to let one of the committee members know. There needs to be tank labels somewhere, and the tank labels simply let us know who is responsible for the animals in those tanks. So if custodial comes through and there's a flood, they have somebody to call, and we're not doing the everything, trying to figure out who belongs to who and where we're at. These tank labels can simply be on the door if everybody in that, or every tank in that lab belongs to the same group. But for our education programs, every tank has a different student working in it. So every tank then has a tank label that says what's in there, who's responsible for it, how long they're in there. And that just helps us kind of track that a little bit.
Cinnamon? Yeah. I'm sorry, but where does the ODFW flow come into all of this? Do you know?
Yeah, so ODFW flow comes in from the intake and directly back out to the bay. You guys are not part of this though because you're not an OSU building.
Okay, I was just wondering.
You are welcome, and we encourage you to think about following this because this gives us some documentation in case somebody comes at us and says, how are you doing this? We can say, look, we have this plan in place, but you guys are not going to be held responsible for this at all.
So just clarifying,
Sure.
So we're in the NAL, so do we still have to comply with these?
You have to comply with the animal care plan.
Right.
You don't have to follow the limitations on the flow-through system.
Oh, I see.
And we'll talk about what those are in detail. Yeah. We are also asking, and you guys probably already do this, that you're keeping health logs. So making sure that your animals are, when they're fed, that the water is flowing, recording when the animals die, all the things that you probably are doing anyway. We're going to ask you to keep that. And then there is a standard set of guidelines that we're asking you to follow, or you follow your own protocols. We just need them written. And so we're going to baby step through number 1 and number 5 here in a second. But I just want to make sure there's no questions on 2, 3, or 4. Letting somebody in the committee know, displaying something that identifies who's responsible for the critters, and keeping some kind of log.
Do you need to know all changes? Like we have 1,000 animals right now, and we have 200 in 2 months. Can we just say,
Nope.
we're having animals February to June?
Yep. And for you guys do the same thing over and over again. You'll just have to basically, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but if there's some kind of treatment that you're doing, you write it up once and we just have it and that's done. And it should be pretty simple on how to write it up, but we're going to talk about that. Okay, so here are the flow-through requirements. Again, if you're in an OSU building and the water is going directly into the bay, you cannot have, according to ODFW's requirements, only non-controlled species. So anything that is considered extremely invasive, and they have a term for that, that cannot go into our open seawater system. Animals can only be healthy, nothing can be sick or diseased. All food must be frozen, collected locally, or provided by the broodstock program, which they do all sorts of great stuff for us. And that's basically to reduce disease transfer from one bay to another. And this is kind of what you were thinking, Chris, that we can't have, in that particular system, we can't have chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, or general fertilizers because we're not treating the effluent. pH is controlled at a lab level. Basically, we need to make sure that we're not dumping acidificated water out into the bay because we have a point source. Same with temperature. And then again, with the flow-through system, any fish needs to be documented under IACUC. So number 5 of that list of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 was to follow the general guidelines for animal care. This is basically a pre-approved set of animal health care ideas, and they're in the binders and they're on the website, and I'll show you both of those, that basically state if you're going to care for an animal in a flow-through system and you're going to take care of it just like you would to make sure it lives and you're not doing anything to mess with it, then you're fine. So that's primarily animals that are on display. They're getting fed, they're being cared for, they have the right density to keep them healthy, they're not stressed. All of that is pretty simple and straightforward. For those that are doing research, you probably are augmenting one of those things. And so we have a checklist in the animal care website that basically steps you through when you need to step beyond the guidelines, those pre-approved guidelines, and write something up. Are you working on a closed or partially closed system? You're probably going to need to write something up. If you're on the flow-through system, you don't have to worry about it. Are you altering the incoming seawater? This list is probably going to grow, but this was what was in my head when I was making the checklist. Temperature, dissolved oxygen, salinity, pH, nutrient load, any of those changes, we'll just check yes or no. Are you altering, and here's some wiggle words, you guys are going to find some of those in here. Outside of optimal care, are you changing how you're feeding them, how you're cleaning them, what kind of habitat they're in, or their stocking density outside of optimal care? That's your guys' call on what's optimal care. But if you're stressing them, you're putting them in something that is causing their behavior to act a little bit different, you're probably altering that. And we can talk more about that too. And this might be the biggest difference for a lot of us. If you are going to not able to take that animal back and release it into the habitat, and you need to end its life at the end of your experiment, you need to do that in as painful, non-painful way as possible. So you need to follow euthanasia or pipping protocols. If you're not able to do that and you've checked yes to any one of these, you need to write something up that says why you're doing what you're doing. We're not saying no to anything, we're just asking you to write it down. And so it looks something like this, the standard operating procedures for treatment. This is my made-up one about purple urchins. We're asking you to identify who's responsible, kind of that same kind of stuff that would be on your lab tag. And then you're going to address the one thing that you're stepping outside of the standard protocols for. So in this particular example, I was going to do something with temperature. So you want to focus on the what, how, and why of what you're doing. Think about a layperson coming in and saying, why did you do that to your critter? This is why you're doing, and this is how you're doing it. So we want to change the temperature up to from ambient to 20 degrees. How am I doing that? I'm doing that with an inline heat exchanger. I'm stepping it up 1 degree every day up to a certain point. Why am I doing it? We're looking at climate impact. That is as detailed as I need you to be if you need to have your own SOPs. And then you can just basically say, everything else, I'm following the plan. And so some of the examples that I got is for endpoint, some of the research projects, you can't use MS222 because you need to do something else with them at the end, that chemical impacts what you need to do with them. Just write it down. We're using what we have, the best possible procedures to be able to do that. One thing to note is that it is no longer acceptable to just freeze an animal and call that euthanasia. There has to be something that happens first before you freeze them.
Like
Freezing.
How do you?
MS222.
Oysters don't respond to that.
Then you have to write down why you're doing what you're doing. Tim, do you have another suggestion for oysters?
Oh, oysters, I mean, you can use things like magnesium chloride. There's a list of some other things that tend to work on mollusks better than MS222. I can certainly provide that. We actually have, there's a reference that the AVMA has put out that covers almost all phyla now, and as well as the Association of Zoological Vets has another one for what we call non-domestic species. So I can provide that, but magnesium chloride is what we tend to use for our mollusks.
So we're going to have to get an exception when we're spawning our oysters.
Yep, just write it down.
We open a lot of oysters,
Yep.
1,000 or more.
Yep.
And we just can't.
Like I said, we're not saying you can't do what you need to do your work. We're just asking you to write it down. It's as simple as that. And that way, if we get another animal complaint and IACUC comes back and looks at us, we can say, yep, everything that we're doing here is documented. And we're doing the best that we can with what we've got to be able to reach our research needs. Other questions on writing?
We give quite a lot of oysters away to maintenance folks. They go and they can use them.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do about that?
It's a good question. If you're giving away your critters to be consumed, where does that stand? But IACUC is not the one managing this, we are. Let me think about it, Chris. Let me see what we can do to come up with something that works.
Write it down, I guess.
Right, but what we're writing down is for scientific purposes. I've had that question before because there are other groups that give away food to the food bank. And so that's what I'm thinking, if we can come up with something for those kind of things. We don't want to stop that process. I mean, ODFW gives away pounds of clams to, or at least we did when I was a seeker, to the food bank. So, those kind of things are part of our culture here to support our local community. I just need to think about how to word it. Other questions about this? So really, that's it. That's all we're asking you to do. This procedure will come into place on June 1st. We're asking that you have whatever protocols. You can take a binder. It should be in your lab right next to your EH&S binder. There's a place in there for you to put your protocols. There will be somebody from the committee or somebody that was authorized by the committee walking through and just making sure that you're up to date and that you have the protocols. And if you're not, we'll offer our help. So that's where we're at now. If somebody is consistently not supporting that, then there might be some consequences. But right now, at this point, we're just trying to get everybody on board. It really, for most of you in the room, it should be a one-time effort. You should be able to put this together, it sits up there, and unless you do something dramatically different, you have a new student come in, your SOPs should stay pretty simple. The thing that we are working on as Hatfield is actually, as Dr. Camilla Morgan just stated, having a better place for some resources. You guys probably know your critters better than anybody, but our students don't. And they're coming in and they're being asked to set up experiments and those kind of things, and they might not know what the animal naturally eats. They might not know what the natural behavior is. They definitely don't know when an animal is stressed and starting to be ill. So we're really starting to think about how to build some resources that would be advantages for you guys potentially, but also for our students. And so that's that top box that we're not quite fully developed and all the way there yet. There's been some talk about having some abilities to do disease recognition and some of those kind of things and pathologies. We're not quite there yet either, but it's kind of in my brain that would be a nice thing that Hatfield could have as a resource for this community. We'll see where this goes. So I'm kind of the chair of the committee at the moment, so if there's any questions, concerns, worries, thoughts, you can contact me. If you're uncomfortable contacting me, you can talk to Ichang or Dr. Miller Morgan. We're happy to talk to you about that. I wanted to jump onto the website really quick so you can see where that was at. If you have questions. Where did I put it? I'll just go back and find it. So that's just the standard HMSC website. If you go under research, animal care is right there. Click on it. Everything that's in the binder in front of you, everything that we've talked about is here. If you click on under the animal care plan, you actually get the actual plan. It looks like legal language, and I can open that up here in just a second so you can see it. But that's there. We also have the guidelines on here. We have the flow-through requirements, and then we're building our resources right now. Example of the tags are there, example of health logs are there. The checklist is there, best practices examples are there for protocols if you want to steal that one out and used. You're welcome to do that.
Do we make our own tags or do we need to use?
You can use whatever you want.
Okay.
Yep, you don't have to do something that I was doing. Yeah, most people have something.
The key is just a name and a contact number. That's really the key.
So the language basically just takes you through the things we talked about. Who's included, what the committee, is on the committee currently. It's whoever Bob's appointed to at the moment. What our responsibilities are. The fact that this is totally a living document, it will change as you guys start pushing on it and start exploring it and trying to see what works and what doesn't. We'll change it. We'll make it work for us. There's the labeling, the monitoring, the health logs, and us coming through and making sure everything's okay. And then information about the flow-through system is on here. So, I mean, they're not more than like 2 pages of document, but it does kind of formalize what we've been talking about. The guidelines, like we talked about, basically anything that would be necessary for an animal to be healthy and happy and live to this ripe old age of whatever is what you would need to do. If you step outside of that, then you're going to need to write those protocols.
How can you tell if an animal is healthy and happy?
Yeah, so the way that the things that I've been reading with invertebrates, of course, it's really, really hard. Things like telling if it's in pain or distressed or any of those are really, really hard as well. And so the documentation basically says to give it the benefit of the doubt. If you notice any behavior changes, it's probably due to some kind of stress. If you're doing something to it that's outside of its normal experience, it's probably dealing with some kind of stress. Does that answer your question, Chris? Let's talk about it a little bit more.
I mean, everything we do in the lab is taking the animal out of its natural environment,
Right.
so putting it into an environment that's certainly abnormal.
Yeah, absolutely.
You look at the octopus, it's a tiny little space. Is that a healthy and happy animal? I don't know. How do
Yeah.
you measure happiness?
So happiness probably wasn't the right word that I used, for sure. On the octopus, they have a health metric that they use, and it has many different parameters on it that they track and see if it's changing how it's eating, how it's moving, how it's interacting, its weight. I don't know what else is on there. Several different.
Color, skin integrity, lots on behavior, if it's pacing, if it's resting, if it's, we have a document that check off lists anytime we feed this animal or clean or observe. We do it probably up to every day sometimes, and it's probably like 24 different check off boxes that then also have 4 categories. So it's very
It's going to vary
detailed.
with animal. I mean,
Right, I was
the
gonna
list
say.
for assessing oyster health is shorter than.
Is it
I
closed?
got this with the octopus on my graduate students. I'm not sure whether they would
Sunlight.
You're looking, I mean, really and honestly, you're looking for change. Right?
What about, if we have dead animals, we've talked about how we can't put them in a trash can anymore. Well, a few months ago, we talked about that.
Yeah, if they're already dead, the best thing to do is freeze them first and then throw them away. If
But they
possible.
shouldn't be visible in a trash can outside. Or is that
So the thing, it'd be best if you can bag them and then throw them away, because, and that has nothing to do with this, it has to do with the stench that happens in the garbage disposal during the summer. And when we have things dripping out the bottom, so if we can freeze them and then bag them and then throw them away, it's better. And that has nothing to do, like I said.
Okay.
It just helps with some sanitation issues.
Other questions for me?
So you mentioned that freezing is off the table. Is that like for good off the table, and is there a particular reason for that?
Yeah, so again, we'll use our octopus because that's just a very visual. You probably wouldn't shove it in a bag and throw it in a freezer and call it good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's been enough studies now that show that you're basically slowly suffocating the animal, and that's not necessarily the best way to end their life. And so there are other options. As long as it's acceptable within the research protocol, there are other options that we can do that ends life a little bit with less distress.
Yeah, they're established euthanasia protocols for cephalopods.
And for just about anything else. But yeah, straight up freeze is no longer acceptable.
Are those available? They're not on your webpage though. So I'm thinking, we collect those shrimp all the time and ODFW doesn't want us to put them back out there.
Right, you need to kill them.
Yeah, so we've frozen them so far, but.
Yeah, there's methods to pit them, to cut them, kill them that way, because that's faster than freezing them. Or there's methods that we can do. So that is one thing that we need to improve on the website, is have some better resources on the euthanasia components. That's definitely a weakness that I have, because I don't understand how to do that for every animal that you guys work with
The
at all.
AVMA euthanasia protocols, which cover most invertebrates, is online. So if you just Google AVMA euthanasia guidelines, you can download that.
Yeah, ethanol is the appropriate euthanasia,
For what?
like baby crab, little baby.
I'd have to go back and look and see. There's actually, for a lot of these groups, there's multiple options.
Yeah. If you do have a healthy animal or project's ended, we might be interested in taking an animal. You don't have to euthanize it for your project. If your project's done, you have a bunch of animals, they're healthy, we may be interested. We're not interested in everything, but it's worth checking with the visitor center first.
Even if you feed a live animal to a live animal,
No, not for feeding, for exhibiting.
over exhibit. So what do we do when we feed a live animal to a live animal?
What are you feeding out?
Well, I'm just hypothesizing, for example. A clam, for example.
Like we feed clams to our crabs.
So what do we do about that?
Was the clam collected for food or was it collected for display?
Usually it's collected for display and then used as food.
Yeah, so there's some wiggle there, right? We talked about it being brought in for display or for research purposes. If it's being brought in for food, that's a different purpose. I would still encourage you to do the best you can to take care of those animals, feed them, care for them, all the things that you would want to do. And if you want, you can write something down that says, I'm gonna collect this many, I'm gonna collect clams throughout the year, and some of those will get fed out. Boom, you're done. You've met the
I think
requirement.
as long as you're writing it down, that's the main point, isn't it? So
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
If we can justify freezing the animal,
Yep,
if
absolutely.
we write it down, it's fine. Because
Yep.
I think, pithing 1,000 burrowing shrimp or putting 1,000 animals in magnesium chloride, it's not practical. And I would argue that it's more painful for duct to be placed in a solution of magnesium chloride than being put into a fridge, because dying of hypothermia is actually quite an easy way out.
So that is not the findings of many of the professionals that evaluate the way we kill animals. They have decided, and it's changed. I mean, it used to be that freezing was an acceptable way. We've moved beyond that point to the fact that there are other options that are less, that are more acceptable ways to end life.
And then our job is to balance that, to see what works for you, what works to meet the guidelines as best we can. That's kind of our job. And so that, again, this is sort of an evolving process, so we're trying to keep it as
Painless for us
painless
as
as
well.
possible for everybody, but this is the direction that we've been told to move, so.
Well, I can understand it with the octopus, because an octopus is supposed to have the intelligence of a cat. But I just find this is overreach for things like clams and gopher. And you go to local ocean here and you eat oysters on a half shoulder of line. So are we taking a standard here that is quite outside of what is a social norm?
But not in a university, and not for research.
Yeah, I would say almost all animal care standards do not match the food industry.
Right.
or
At all. I mean, the way that sheep and pigs and those kind of things are treated on campus as part of research are very different than what they would be treated in a farm. The purposes are different.
More just a comment than a question.
Please,
But,
this is, wide open for discovery.
so for ODFW, when we do acoustic tagging for fish, we are not allowed to ever use MS-222 in the environment because they may be consumed.
Yeah.
So anything that is going to human consumption, just for people to think about, MS-222, any of those euthanasia have to be removed. Otherwise, by ODFW standards, they can't be given to humans.
Yeah.
I assume.
Definitely. Right, and that might be one of those things that we were talking about where freezing is what we have to do in order to be able to do the things.
That's typically, you're talking about a vertebrate here, so that would be typically written into the animal care and use protocol.
Right.
And then it would be evaluated.
Right.
And, I mean, there are a lot of studies that are approved without MS-222 for surgical implantation because the animals can't be consumed.
Right.
And that's not uncommon. It's just a matter of justifying it.
Yeah.
But at a vertebrate, at this point, at the vertebrate level, that justification is required at a higher level than we're requiring.
Yeah.
Any other questions for me? So please let me know if you have questions as you're starting to think about this and what it looks like in your lab. If you need additional resources like the euthanasia protocols, I'll do what I can to get those on the website. These binders are going to be in the equipment room in the East Wing 121, where all of the chemical supplies are also located. So if you need a binder, you're welcome to put it in there. The website will stay the most current, and as you guys are already finding, things are going to be altering a little bit as we start rolling this out and we're moving it forward. So that will always be the most updated version. But this is a great place for you guys to put in any protocols so that whoever comes in to double check that everything is okay can look for these orange binders and immediately find what needs to be found. Okay. It's a beautiful day. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.